Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our session today. And it's lovely, as always, to meet you wherever you are from. And today we've got an interesting webinar, which is one dedicated to digraphs. So it's 3 p.m. UK, and I'm about to start. And we have my colleague Sinead, who will be looking at the questions in the chat. There will be a certificate for this, so you don't need to ask in the chat. We will automatically send it to you. And more than anything, we're absolutely delighted that you're joining us. So first of all, we're going to be looking at digraphs, and these are one of those tricky areas that might be if you're new to phonics or you've experienced some issues with children learning about digraphs. But don't worry, we've got lots of tips for you and some solutions as well. But first of all, welcome to our session. As always, we love having you here. But in the chat, either tell us where you're from or put a little flag so that we can see where you're coming from. And I'm just going to pop up the chat book here and let's see. Qatar, wow, there we go. Jordan, South Africa, Indonesia, Palestine, Pakistan, Ghana, wow, Malaysia. So we've got everyone. We've got a really global Niti, hello. A lot of people I know here, so it's great. Roberta, and it's wonderful to have friendly faces watching this program. So welcome everybody. If you're regular and also if you're new, we love having you here. And please give us ideas of what you would like your training tips on, or how we can do webinars for the future. We're always trying to curate this to fit you. So now that I know where you're from, let's move on with looking at my PowerPoint. So let's see if it's working okay. Yes, here we go. Here we go. So what's in the session? Briefly, I'm going to be going over the Jolly Phonics program and how well that works and how adaptable it is. And also what we do before we get to the digraphs, and then tips on teaching, but also some activities, because we are a multi-sensory program, how we can move forward still using that approach, but also helping children to absorb the information and get lots of practice. The one good thing about the Jolly Phonics program is that we say it's fast-paced, and there's a reason we say fast-paced, because if you're doing the letter sounds too slow, the children don't really catch them, and they need to have opportunities for blending and segmenting. But also we do realize that for some of you, you like to slow down when you have a teaching point, and we'll be looking at that. And also the benefits of using Jolly Phonics is that it is highly flexible to meet your ages and also your teaching dynamics, which means if you have 5 lessons a week, that's great, but some of you may only have 3 lessons a week, and some of you may be working in academies. So the great thing about the lesson plans are they are adaptable to actually fit with your way of teaching. And of course, it was developed by teachers, Sue Lloyd and Sarah Wernham. And with them being teachers, they know what it's like in a classroom and how you can have challenges, but also you can have great successes. So that's a great introduction to it. But more than anything, the great benefits of using the program is it's structured. And that means that everything that is around the core, which are the letter sounds, you have all your program and you have the materials and the resources that fit together. And for some of you on a budget, you'll realize you don't need to have a great deal of resources to get going, but the more you use the program, you might find you'd like to add on to what you have. And it's great for children who have English as an additional language, and more so for children who have SEN. And some of you who are familiar with the product and the program know exactly what I'm saying. Now, I would be failing to tell you about digraphs if I didn't mention about the 5 key skills. And as you can see here, the 5 key skills are layered or are in every part of the program to a lesser or greater degree. Certainly when we start with the first few letter sounds, we don't have blending and segmenting, but this is something that we evolve and children move on to, and it becomes effortless with practice. Besides that, knowing the letter sounds, the letter formation is something we are acutely aware of, may take time, but we build into the program multisensory activities and practice so that children are building up those fine motor skills and they have that ability to move on to writing. And what we know is writing doesn't always have to be with pen and pencil. It can be with plastic letters, it can be with flashcards, it can be with many things. And then we move on to identifying the sounds in the words with segmenting, blending, which is a really crucial skill, and then tricky words. So these are all in the program, and as children progress, you can see how they are effortlessly building up their knowledge and skills using the 5 key skills, and also how they are in the program. One of the things I will highlight is the teacher's book. And if you are using Jolly Classroom or the program, you'll find that the teacher's book will give you everything you need to know on how to deliver your lesson. And that's important to know if we're talking about digraphs, because what it will do is build up to where you need to be or the children need to be before you deliver Group 4. Also, what it does do is give you suggestions on how to build up the beginning of your lesson with examples, your core, your main teaching point, and then what you can do after. Familiarity with the program and using the teacher's book will mean you will know exactly how much to give to your class, where you need to revise. And something Sue Lloyd and Sarah Wernham often say is that pretty quickly within the program, you will find through books 1, 2, and 3, you will find that usually within the first few weeks of using the program, that you will identify children who are struggling. And that's something we're going to talk about as we move on. So you've had an understanding of how the books work. And very briefly, I'm going to mention Jolly Classroom, which is our digital component. Jolly Classroom works well if we have the pupils' books as well, because during Jolly Classroom, we have 3 steps which are resembling the contents of the pupils' book. But we've also found that teachers have suggested that using the pupils' books help them see how the children are progressing. It's evidence of what they are doing. And also you have their progress in the pupils' books to look at. So don't dismiss the books if you're using Classroom, or you can download the pages, because it's quite important that you have a file with what the children are doing or the pupils book so that you can see how they're progressing, certainly their handwriting, and also they can go back and do bits that they found difficult as they move through the program with a sense of understanding. So you have those options which are there providing everything you need to know about Jolly Classroom and also using Jolly Phonics. So that's getting us ready to move on to the main part of my webinar. Now, how does the program work? Well, what I would say is that we are aware that reading doesn't come naturally. We need practice, we need understanding, we need comprehension. We need to know what the letter shapes are and what the letter sounds are. And this is why we progressively build up children's knowledge. And as you can see here, we start off simply by small words like CVC words like at, cat. And then we're extending this as children have their knowledge. But as you can see, as we move on with the column that's on the left, we are beginning to bring in the concept of 2 letters making 1 sound. So children really need to be secure with their letter shapes and letter sounds. And again, with practice, with writing, with reading, it's a combined effort on how we do this. And as you look, we have a word like shampoo, which is not an English word, and brightly, which has a trigraph in there. So you can see how children are building up their skills. So it's progressive, but also it can be effortless for children if the foundation is put in correctly. And if we move on to the right side of this slide, you see how the curiosities of English language work. We don't say chemist, we say chemist. So in the program, children learn about how these changes happen. We don't say doctor, we say doctor. We have the schwa coming in. We don't say woman, we say women. And is it read or is it read? And we don't say choir, it's choir. So it's important that we get the left-hand side sorted out with children learning about the letter shapes and the letter sounds and building on those before we move on to the complex code. And this is all in the program and it is all laid out for you. And as children move forward, we are always going back to that original teaching point to make sure that there is revision in there. But for some of you, you may have children joining your classes halfway through the year or at different points, and they can catch up pretty easily. So we often get asked about the pace of teaching. Again, we say it's a fast-paced program. Ideally, it's 5 sounds a week. But again, what we do understand, it's adaptable because, as I've mentioned, some of you have your classes maybe 3 times a week, or even if you're an academy, twice a week. So we can understand that you need to adapt to the pace, but we also want children to keep going, to keep using those skills so they don't have to think about what did I. It's about revision, actually. It's easier if it has got pace to revise the letter sounds that the children have. And as we can see, we have 42 sounds. I'm going to ask in the chat box. We have 42 sounds, but are there more sounds? Let's see if our teachers today know there's more sounds. How many sounds do we think we have in the English language? We start with 42 sounds, not alphabet, but how much more do we have? I'm looking at the chat box to see if anyone knows how much more we have. We have 44. And what more do we have? 44, but there's a lot more. So this is what we begin with, 42 or 44, but actually it goes into the hundreds. If you look at the complex code, yeah, plus alternatives, 102. Wow. So yeah, some of you are putting around 126. So as you know, it can extend, but it would be too much for us to get children to do that amount. So we stick with 42 sounds and we do the other two as they move on. So there are 44 sounds, but we make sure that these are all secure. And as many of you know, we have them in this order for a reason, so that children can start to read and use CVC words pretty easily and quickly. And they do with success. But what do we notice when we get to group 4? And I'm going to ask you in the chat to say, what do you see at group 4? What do you see at group 4? Let's see if we can get the chat up. Oh, I've lost my chat. What do we see at group 4? Digraphs, yes, we can see the long vowels. So a lot of you already know and are seeing how it works. That we have the short vowels first, and then we have the long vowels. We're starting with the digraph. So it's important that you recognize that these first 3 groups are using the short vowels, and we want children to get this right. We want them to be doing the CVC words, lots of interaction, and of course if you're using Jolly Classroom, you have all the activities and the games, and I strongly advise you not to chop anything out because it is done in a specific order for a reason, that children are revising, then they're learning, and then they're putting it all together. So you can see here, apart from k and k, that it's pretty straightforward, and children should be getting the grapheme, the letter shape, along with the letter sound securely. But in order to do that, we've got to make sure, oops, let me go back. I think I've jumped one. Yeah. In order to do this, we've got to make sure that they are secure in certain areas. So let's have a look what a digraph is. So what is it? It's 2 letters making one sound. They're combined to make one sound. And we have consonant digraphs and we have vowel digraphs. Now, I've been in many classes and met many children who often get confused with, but you said it's 1 letter and one sound, and now it's 2 letters and one sound. So for some of you, you may have a class that will quickly get this concept very succinctly and just move on and move on. And for others, you may have children who need a little bit of time to slow down and need that reinforcement with the visual cues and also some games. Again, this emphasizes the flexibility of the program, but remember, we do start with the A sound and there's a lot more to come. So children will get familiar pretty quickly, but they need to see it, they need to hear it, they need to practice it. So as you can see here with this lovely illustration, it doesn't have to be big wall charts or displays, but we need children to be making that connection with, if you're showing me that two letters make one sound, I want to see it in a word. I want to hear it. I want to be able to read it or be read to. And as a teacher, when you're coming to this point, when you are doing stories or other areas of the curriculum, highlight. Can you hear that digraph we've just learned? Phonics shouldn't be taught in isolation, and the more reinforcement you can give to the sticky bits, the better it is. So within the program, these are how the digraphs are displayed. And as you've pointed out, we have the long vowels first, and then we move on to other ones. And these are also indicated. We have the oo and the oo, which are done in different fonts to help children with pronunciation. I bet you can't remember who taught you that school is a long oo sound and hook is a short one, but somehow you know. But imagine if you're learning English as a second language, it's easier when the font is helping you with the pronunciation. And also with the th and the th, the voiced and the unvoiced. We have the qu, which again in English, we never have a word with Q without the U. So this works really well. And as you can see, the other ones are particular because they do make one sound. If you think of the word fork, we don't go for o orca. Can I have a for orca? It's a for orc. So think about these, and it's good if you're using the resources that can give you lots of examples. When I first started teaching, I was scrambling for words. I started with the phonics handbook, and they didn't have all the resources 20 odd years ago. And now you have everything here to help with your digraphs. But what I would say is that poor teaching can lead to significantly harming how children read and write. They need to know and practice how to do this. They need how to identify them and to read and to spell them so that they can move on to writing and being able to produce them well. So this is where we use the resources to do so. So why do digraphs matter? Well, for one thing, how many words in English have you seen that have digraphs in them? They are familiar words, they're in common words, but more than anything, if we don't teach it correctly, it means that children are pausing to process every letter. We want them to be able to use things that we have in place, like the dots, to be able to help them identify. But more than anything, it helps with reading fluency. If children are trying to work out a word and they're slavishly working at how do I break it down, what does it mean, it's going to have a deficit on their fluency and also their comprehension. Decoding, if they can't decode that word because they haven't learned the digraphs properly, they may be reading a word like shop as shop. So you can immediately see how we probably have difficulties further along if we don't get it right. Also, for sounding out, it could be that children are struggling with blending and segmenting because they don't know the digraphs very well, which means that it becomes a cognitive overload. So children become stressed, they become frustrated, they abandon the task, and then we have a downward spiral. All these tiny little things can have an effect. And also what we try to do is give children the capacity to build up their knowledge. And so getting it right with group 4, which has a lot of digraphs, we can move on with reading and the fluency, decoding, and also being able to sound out. So as you can see, there's a lot included in when we're doing the digraphs. And for spelling accuracy, if you can remember how we start with the CVC words, it's really important that children know how to spell the word and read it. So it's a combination of things. But more than anything, if we can get that fluency with reading, we want the fluency with writing. So having enough practice and exposure to the digraphs and how you teach them has an impact in all the other areas of learning. So it's not just the flashcard, it's not just looking at a game, it's how are you helping children get that knowledge of the digraphs out there in the classroom. And I think more than anything, sometimes children slow down with the digraph and it becomes an area of difficulty. Is it an area of difficulty because they don't know them well enough, or they haven't had enough practice, or you've gone really quickly, or you've just stopped when you realize that maybe 40% of your class is struggling and I need to slow down? So it's a balance for you as a teacher as well on how you instruct them. So if we look at why digraphs matter, they're everywhere. You know, they're in books that we read. Children need to see them. They're in environmental print. But more than anything, it's the vocabulary and getting the sounds right. When I lived in Spain, children would often say, I need to get my coat, meaning coat. I need to get my coat. So it affected pronunciation, and it also affected how they did their writing. And a biscuit was a biscuit, not a biscuit. So again, communication. Digraphs matter for many reasons, but I've given you a few. But I'm sure if we go into the chat box, can any of you highlight some of the issues that you have teaching digraphs? And some of them says, do you join? Do you recommend you joining digraphs, learning them to read from the beginning? Joining. We have a practice book. So for one thing, some people like using the precursive because they say it joins them together and children never forget. You also can use different ways of teaching using the magnetic letters, the tiles, and also games. The third is the most confused digraph, yes, but then if you know it's the most confusing one, you slow down and teach it well. And also, when children don't see the digraph and they segment each sound, that means if they're segmenting each sound that you need to go back and reteach. And use the sound dots, use the sound buttons to help. And also recognizing the digraphs and reading. Voiced and voiceless gets confused. Yes, so we've got some good things here. And accent, of course. Accent is another issue. But again, what I do realize with accents are that children need to see and they need to hear the digraph. We're not asking every child to take on the British accent, but be able to recognize their way of saying it so that when they write it, it does work for them. So what I'm reading in the chat are very common. So when do we introduce the digraphs? We've said we start at group 4. So what do I need to think about? So before you go to group 4, first of all, let's make sure that you've got groups 1 to 3 secure. This is for a reason because, as some of you said, we have the short vowels. We need to make sure that the children know the a, e, o, a before we move on to the a, e, I, o, u. So making sure that that is in place often involves doing something like an assessment. The assessment may not be for every child because, as I mentioned, using the program, you can generally see the children who need reinforcement and you can generally catch the children before they go too far and give them the right revision in place. We have the assessments which you can download from the website. And again, it's quite a task doing every child, but focus on those children that may need specific attention where you can identify, certainly within the first groups, what are they missing? What elements do I need to revise? And as the teacher's book shows you, there's a lot of revision that you can build in. Remember that using the flashcards that are in groups, you're always revising something that they have learned before. There is always a way to bring the child to their present lesson, but also that you can revise something that they have done in the past. So the assessment sheets are available, as you can see here on the website. You can download them, but also there are other things that you can use. We have information sheets. We have, as you can see here, the code, Sue Lloyd's alphabetic code, and more extensive assessments as children move on. But what I would recommend is that you assess before you move on to the digraphs. Make sure that the children have got their short vowels in place before we move on. And if we think about assessments in Jolly Classroom, you have the digital assessment pack. There are videos to support that. And also you can add all your children. It's slightly different to the paper one, but again, it gives you the opportunity to be able to monitor children that you feel may, especially with something like digraphs, may need to be monitored because they're getting it in one area, which is they can see it and they can say it, but they may not be recognizing it in another area, which is reading and reproduction. So we have these things we need to think of. And if we get it right before we move on too far, it means that there are no gaps further along. As a teacher, I know that we have desired outcomes at the end of the terms, but what is best is if we can fill those gaps before they move too far forward and have a deficit when we get to year 1 or year 2. Try and find out where we need to fill in. And you have that pace where they will accelerate once they get to know how digraphs are working, and you can think about how you can build in these additional activities. There are some activities which are really important. And as you can see here, I'm keeping an eye on the time, keeping an eye on the time. How do we introduce the digraphs in Jolly Phonics? So some of you are very familiar with this process. We go to our teacher's book, or if you're using Jolly Classroom, we have the drop-down menu with the teacher tips. And again here, what you can see up here, we're revising some sounds. It's really important. I've been to classes and they've been doing them all. It's like, no, revise some. And the good thing about revising some is that you pick the previously taught letter sounds. You can fine tune it to the areas that you have missing with your children. If they are confusing the with something, or the b and the d, you can focus on those. But then we have our lesson plan on what we're going to do. And as you can see in the teacher's book, it gives you the story. You don't have to read the story verbatim. The idea of the story is one that you can dilute or give to your children with their ability. But one thing that is important is within the story that is in the teacher's book, you have certain context words. And these context words are really important, that are used in the story so that children are hearing what we're teaching. So as you can see, we're introducing the A sound. There's something different about this. Children will notice that there's 2 letters, so you draw attention to that. Some of them will be aware that the new wall freeze has gone up and there's a lot of information up there. There's a lot of 2 letters making one sound, or there's 2 letters in that box. They will be aware that it's different from the freezes from 1, 2, and 3, and you can highlight that. But more than anything, what you can see here, we have context words that all have the A sound. Now, this is the same for all the digraphs in the stories that we have. So it's important that we refer to these context words so that children are hearing them and also you are drawing attention to them. Now, if we have a look at my little video here, children have learned the single sounds. They've got the A, they've got the A and the E, and then suddenly we're putting these together and they're not A-E, it's A. So this is where the dot is handy. And having the dot, children are hearing and seeing these in the words that are in the story. Snail, train, pain, brain. So able to hear these, I'm now going to show them with the dots underneath. I might do this on my board, on my smart board, and you can see that I've also given them a color so it pops out. Also, if I wanted to look at more words, I could use the word book where they have more of these words with the A sound. Now, what you saw with the different colors with using the red and the blue, whatever you have to make the colors pop out. Let's see if I can get those words back up here. What you can see is that it immediately resonates with the children and being able to see where A fits in that word. And also looking at the multisensory approach that we have, there's some children who would really connect with using different colors. One thing I used to say at the beginning using an A was that A always has friends around it. It's never at the end of the word. Okay, we have a couple of words in English that end in I or E, like ski or muesli, but they're not English words. So this advice doesn't work for every digraph, but certainly while I'm introduced, I'm showing them the pattern of that A sound, because I want them to get it 100%. I want them to be able to recognize it, because a bit later on we have the alternatives. in being able to show this multi-sensory, and I might get the children to come up and circle it. I'll get them to count it. I'll let it to tap out on their arm. I would really emphasize my first lesson on being able to show children how this works. I'd even put the words in a context so that children can hear them. Now, what I have found is watching teachers and them using the program is sometimes they say that consonant blends. Are they consonant blends? No, they're not consonant blends. We mustn't introduce that concept into the program too early. If you're going to start saying that consonant blends can be used within the first three groups, we are confusing children. It's not part of the program at this stage. Later on in the program, when children are really secure that they know that a b and a l are two separate sounds, but if you snap them together, they go bl, like in black, that's a consonant blend, a beginning blend and end blend. So we don't want to confuse children by introducing that concept. And it happens a lot because there are other programs that do this, or it may be in your English workbooks that you've used before. But these are two sounds. And what we are teaching to children are the digraph is two letters making one sound. So be mindful of the language you use and also introducing a concept that the children are not ready for yet. They will be later on, but as we saw in that little video, we need to make sure that children are 100% sure of those sounds before we can move on to the next concept. Otherwise, going back to how we have that fluency in reading and writing, it won't be there if they don't know the individual sounds. And then they can move on to the next skill of snapping those together and using them with digraphs. So you can see how layering or scaffolding children's skills and knowledge is important, and also not to complicate it before it's needed. So children need practice. They need lots of practice. And what you are probably noticing is with your first three groups, which are probably very quick and pacey, children have got that very well. So moving on, as I've mentioned before, you may need to slow down or look about how you are reinforcing these first few ones. We've got a lot when we first start into reading, writing, and also how children are practicing the knowledge. And I keep saying practicing because this is the one thing I noticed going into classrooms is just holding up a flashcard is not enough. Children need to see those words in a sentence, they need to hear them, and they need to practice them. Also, your children may not be ready for writing activities, but the pupils book gives them that connection from the left and the right side of the brain of writing, where they are using their fine motor skills. And as they are doing the graphemes, as they are handwriting, they are making a connection with the sound and what I write, what I see, what I hear, what I say. And also, if your children are so young, they can be using the sand box, and I'm sure many of you have got children who aren't ready for writing when they have the digraphs. And I'm going to ask in the chat box, what do you do with children who aren't ready for writing and you're teaching digraphs? Some ideas would be lovely. Some people say dot and underline and draw attention to the special sounds. Lovely. And what we can do is also think about, let's see if we use magnetic letters. Lovely. And also, let's see, sandboxes. Have we got any more solutions? What do you do? Clay, another great idea. If they can't pick up a pencil yet, Play-Doh, brilliant, because we are building up the fine motor skills and that tactile engagement, even magnetic letters, it resonates and it is being internalized. So although they're doing the digraphs, try and also get them to pipe cleaners, brilliant, drawing in mud, doing the words so that they are segmenting and blending, and also sand trays, magnet. So everyone's got some excellent ideas. Bottle caps, lovely. So there are so many things that you can do, but also with reading, every time that you are reading those wonderful storybooks, are you highlighting the digraphs in them? So let's have a look at the way we progress. As you can see here, we have the Jolly Classroom slides here where we've gone from doing CVC words to now children are looking at digraphs in practice. The dots are helping them identify, but also they need to be doing blending words and blending practice. And this can be done with the tiles, it can be done with post-its, get them doing some games. How are you planning this into your half-hour or 45-minute lesson? I understand this totally, that many of you don't have a lot of time. So sometimes it might be board work where you can use the post-its or use different colors, getting them to use a context, and also dictation. Again, this is an opportunity to practice not only things like the voiced and unvoiced, but also if there is an accent, that they can see the digraph, and if they're not pronouncing it in perfect Queen's English, they still understand what that digraph represents in a word. So it's about building up your confidence in your class about how far you can go, but also offering the opportunity for children to practice this in a way that fits in with your planning. One of the things that really does work is dictation, and dictation sometimes is kind of put to one side because it takes time. Children often take a bit of time to get themselves organized. And more than anything, handing out 30 whiteboards with whiteboard pens, that's 5 minutes of your class gone. I do remember that. But the benefit of working with children and doing dictation is that process becomes a lot faster. Also, yeah, they may copy, they may be looking, but the point being is if the children are developing their fine motor skills, they are blending and segmenting. And as you can see here with the example, we have the oo sound. So the child is not only practicing their graphemes, they are blending and segmenting. They'll also have a context sentence. So we have a capital letter, and even here we have a full stop. And what I am beginning to see is the child is using the tricky words confidently. And okay, at the top one here, they've forgotten the y in my. But again, we have some good letter formation. So dictation can give you lots of evaluation as well. If a child is not doing dictation well, this is a great point for you to recognize, where do I need to revise? What do I need to do? Maybe the digraphs aren't coming through. And you will notice, especially when we move on to the alternatives, there will be confusion. That is normal. And as you progress, being able to do the dictation can help children organize their thought on where to go. So the dictation sentences are in the teacher's book, but they're also in the workbook. And you can see there's ones that are challenging and ones that are simple. So what happens when children don't know the digraphs well enough? Just keeping an eye on the time. So if a child hasn't mastered the digraphs, they will try to sound out each letter, as I've mentioned. And I'll ask in the chat, have any of you got this issue now in your classroom where children are, I can see, yeah, glasses of coloured water. There's some brilliant ideas here that I think we'll need to share. Um, do you find that if they haven't mastered what they might be doing? And someone says, definitely, definitely, yes. And also, I'm asking you as the group of teachers, how far into group 4 do you go before you stop and think, I need to slow down here? See if anyone can give me an answer there, because it's good to know what is happening in your classrooms, because it helps us with doing webinars like this and being able to, the first two, good. So we have a 3.5-year-old child reading words based on diagrams. That is exceptional. That is exceptional. So again, it doesn't mean just about reading. A small child like that would not be able to demonstrate their knowledge with writing, but certainly they'll be able to ask them to look at magnetic lessons. 2 different colors, okay. So we've got some good strategies going on. So if I'm going right back to the beginning of this webinar where I was talking about, reading and writing and fluency, is that we can compromise reading fluency. And what we want to do is when children get to group 6, we want them to be able to tackle the tricky words and find the tricky bit. We want children to move on to the decodable readers. So what we have been doing group by group is getting children ready for this point. And we can have decoding difficulties, and often that comes when we haven't got the digraphs done in place. So as you can see, these things may reduce motivation with the child. And also, we're always looking, if we think about with our reading books, vocabulary and comprehension. And that's one of the challenges that are not only in Europe, but also in the UK, where we have many children starting school with English as a second language. But what I would say is you can hear that I'm saying is how we're layering and building in. If you're going to do a quick fire class, that is fine, but make sure that there are enough resources and ways that children can practice what they're going to do so that they can also feel that they are secure. So also, if we don't get it right, as I've mentioned about the example for shop, we have horse spelling, and this moves on to the alternatives where we often say if one way doesn't work, try another way, making sure that they have lots of practice with the basic digraphs before we move on. And this is where it becomes sticky, and we need to work at that. And even when we move on to the alternatives, we make sure we go back to our starting point so that children are secure. And again, what we see here, writing expression is something that you may not have thought about, that if you can't write it, you can't be expressive. And again, that is a block. Being able to think of a word in your mind and be able to break it down so that it can be written is a wonderful thing for a child. And of course, they make errors, but we want them to have that curiosity with print where they get started and build up their knowledge. So the multisensory approach, yes, we love that. And you can decide that if you've got classes every day or several each week, what am I going to build in? The headbands are a great idea where you get children to do that, but also have headbands with context words in. So they're practices as well. They're practicing the digraph, but they also have got the words there so that they can see them in a context and practice that, especially with the on-voiced and the voiced the. And one of the things I do know that with the th is that in English it can sound like a f, so we've got to be careful and practice. In the pictures here, you can see we have the illustration cards. It's very, very clear. Children can finger track. That's something also that appeals to young children, and also the magnetic letters. We're looking at addressing every learning style as much as we can. And I love some of these ideas. Some of these ideas you can make and they can stick around for a very long time. The lollipop sticks. I used to have these in a big flower pot on my desk with the sounds that we had been doing. They were just small little display items that helped that child. If they were doing a dictation or they were thinking of a word, they had the visual prompt. Something like the E snake, you can do whatever you like. Again, this could be brought into our arts and crafts, my recycling project, but also getting children connected to other areas of the curriculum. If we're doing sciences about snake, then I can have my snake with some phonics sounds on there. Why not? And very typical here, we've got Halloween coming up here in the UK. And look at that, isn't that just great? How I can bring in a theme to personalize my learning or revision so that children are reading. And this is a great way that children can see how digraphs are working, but also practice reading. And it connects to other areas of learning. And that's something that we are always mindful of. We don't want to teach something in isolation. We want it to connect and resonate. Otherwise, it's very difficult for it to stick. Something very, very simple, of course, the ping pong balls. And I used to have a big stack of these in an old sweet jar. And every time we were doing the register, I'd get one child up to hold up different sounds. And the children would practice the sounds that we'd done, and we'd think of a word it could work with. But look at these really simple ideas. It is so simple at getting children to come up. Now, just imagine if these were sticky digraphs that my children didn't really catch, and I could have them up there and I could be saying the word and they have to find that digraph and circle and color. And again, it's just that interaction and other children saying, it's over there, or it's down there, or it's up there. Again, with the post-its, you don't have to have fancy games or anything, the post-its games, to look for pairs, to also think of words. You can extend it or minimize it as much as possible. And also where you can see the missing digraph, what works, the grow, and we've got joint, urge. And again, you can mix it up, and does it sound right? But again, it's children using their knowledge. If they're not using the knowledge, it doesn't stick. So simple little games that could work even if you've got your corners, your free time, engaging children. And of course, children love to play classrooms. They'd love to be able to replicate you as a teacher in their role play. It can be a bit scary at times, but they would love to be able to do what they've taught, give them the tools to be able to practice and enjoy that. And I'm sure many of you have got great ideas that can support learning, but look at these, simple, cheap, and they don't require, and you can certainly, with some of the ping pong balls and everything, it's year in, year out, you can use them. But let's look at what we have in our program that can support you as well. And again, we have the pages from the pupils' books, and there's so much more than just a few activities. You're looking at not only the finger tracking, the recognition of the graphing, the children, the opportunity to reproduce that. We're doing the handwriting, there's blending and segmenting opportunities, and we also have these little activities and games. So they are putting that knowledge into practice, and we're asking it in different ways. So this is what we want to see. What we see on one side, we want to see on the other. Yes, you can read it, but now show me how you can write that, or you can understand it. So this is why the books are made the way they are, that children are bringing together all those 5 skills that I spoke about at the beginning. And this is also represented in Jolly Classroom, as you can see here. They get the opportunity to read it without the sound. We can even take away, as it flashes up with the blending, we can get the children to do the work all by themselves, or we can give them some clues and help. It depends on your class and the pace of teaching and how you are doing it. And then looking at how we are getting children to use their knowledge. I've taken some examples from Jolly Classroom, and you can see we have some really simple sentences. We sent a card to her. And what I could do, I could ask several questions here. I could ask children about the tricky words. I could ask them to tell me how many sounds are in the word send. But if I'm looking at digraphs, what word would I be asking them to look at? See if you can guess. What word would I be asking them to look at? We sent a card to her. Card. Yeah, and her. So what I'm going to do is ask the children to come up. And if they've learned this, of course they will have learned it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in their practice or in their lesson, to start identifying things. I can use it in many ways, not only for digraphs, but if they still are hearing the sounds in like a word like scent, if they can pick out the punctuation, there's a lot that we can do. And also, as you can see here, the picture cues as well. So we're not failing with our vocabulary and comprehension. And as you can see down here, you can download this, but it's also dictation sentences and the opportunity for the children to give you that evidence. As I say, for some children, you may need to have evidence in their personal file of how they're progressing. And these are the opportunities you have using the pupils' books or using the downloads. So think about this in your class. Now, making sure that we get all the digraphs done from groups 4 to 7, there's a lot in there, a lot that we need to make sure. But the progressive approach, as I've mentioned, is as we move forward, we're always practicing, even when we're introducing the new sound. Children are given the opportunity to practice sounds they have already learned, going right back to the S. So if you're using the program properly, you will never have a gap where the children are not in a place where they feel secure. and you will know where to slow down and move on. That's something that is quite unique to this program, is we're not telling you to go boom, 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 boom at a pace each day. But if the majority of your class isn't getting those initial digraphs in group 4, you can revise, you can use the flashcards, you can use the games, you can use the multi-sensory approach. Not all children learn the same way. Additionally, have fluid planning. I always talk about planning because I remember as a teacher, we were told by the end of the first term, you've got to be here. The second, it doesn't always work like that. So I used to say, can I just have a fluid plan? That if I have a lot of children who are sick or a lot of children aren't working at the same pace, because we never know, can I have my desired outcomes a little bit flexible and see how we move on to the next term? So always be able to have that flexibility to fit with your planning. The assessments are critical because if you have a child who's done spectacularly in the first 3 groups, but then when they move on to 4, 5, 6, and 7, they are failing. It's like, well, what didn't I do right? So think about your assessment points, think about what you're seeing, but also what opportunities are you providing for children to be assessed? They may read perfectly, but how is the writing? They may identify CVC sounds or within, but how are they moving on? So think about how you're doing that. And also practice, which is challenging for all of us with the time. Now, many of you know the alternatives, and also we have this great poster which shows them to you. And as you can see here with the A sound, how we progress. And children really do need to know the A really well before we move on. And that's the same for all of these. I remember that particularly I found that the or one was quite challenging, not only because it changes so much in the way that we write it, but also it's a difficult one. And I used to slow down, particularly here, where we have or, like in autumn and talk and awful, that or sound. You may decide to purchase this, and what I used to do is I used to split it up so that it was an A4 size. So when I was teaching this diagraph, I would have these up on the wall, but I wasn't explicitly teaching them. They were passively there. Children were aware that I had these graphemes here, but there was also those making the same sound. And they'd be saying, Miss, but yeah, what are they? I'd be saying, they make the same sound, but we're not learning them yet. So I was drawing their attention that a bit further on, we'd be doing the same sound, but with different letter shapes. It was very passive, and I didn't focus on that too much. But you might want to get something like this poster and break it down and use it to help with your teaching as a teaching aid. But as we do move on, what do you need to know? You as a teacher need to know how these sounds are manipulated and how they work. Please don't just go page to page and hope it all comes together. Use the download of the complex code or the English code that's on the website so that you can see the progression. Also, so that you can look at how these words or the sounds of the words, how they are manipulated. Because most children, like with A, will see this and they'll say it's like Monday, Tuesday, and they'll think that's the end of the word. But actually, we have a word like crayon. It's not an English word, but we use it, and the A sound is in the middle. So build up your knowledge of how the digraphs in the groups move on to the alternatives. Build up your knowledge about how to teach children the differentiation. Some of them are easy. Look at this E as we have here as in leaf. And some of them are a little bit complex like this one down here. But the amazing thing is if we're tying all this together with what we hear, what we see, what we write, and what we read, it helps children with their different ways of grasping this concept have an opportunity to use their knowledge, and that's what we want. And as you can see, we progress. And again, there might be a lot on these pages. There is a lot for the children to do, but would we do it all in one day? Maybe not. So here we could be looking at the words where we're getting the sound, and then looking at other words with the sound, as we can see here, birthday, 12. I'd spend a bit of time with this. I'd do silly sentences. I'd have them on the board. I'd get the children to circle them. I don't want it to be a passive. experience for them. I want them to really interact. So when they do go to their book, they can easily identify it. And here, as you can see here, the original teaching point, which was the sound. And now we're moving on to the alternatives. So they're never far from that original point, but we're layering on or scaffolding the information that they need. But also, as you can see here, children have that indication. It's not Percy, it's purse on how to read. If you just give children this page and say, do this, this, and this, what are they gaining? But if you interact with them, make this into an activity, you can build out these words, silly sentences, have them dip into a hat and pull out a word and read it. Take things out of context. Some of the activities I've showed you with post-its, it's very easy for children then to build up their understanding of how it works. And as we can see here, my one, I don't really like the or, and or, which is quite challenging for young children. And decodable readers. We have beautiful books that children can use, but more than anything, how are we using these books? Because besides the decodable readers being a place where children can put all that knowledge together, they're suddenly learning that those sounds that I've learned, I can blend and segment, I can read. Comprehension and vocabulary is very important when we come to reading, but this is helping children to decode, to build up their reading skills, because every word that they are reading, and this is why it's important to do it in the right levels, gives them the opportunity to use knowledge that they have. They are not being presented with something they haven't done, the tricky words and also the spellings inside. But it's important we give the right book to the right ability. It's not age, it's ability. And as you can see in here, there are many words that have a digraph. And I'm going to ask you as we're coming to the end, can you look at any words there on these pages? Where are the digraphs? Spot them out for me. Let's see if you can get these as we come to the end of the webinar. Can you see any of the digraphs on these pages? E, yeah. What else? Whirlwind twister, A, yeah, yeah. The yeah. So as you can see, O, yeah. As you can see, where, yeah, yeah, yeah. All that surfing, So just imagine if you decide the A sound, the O in cloud. Just imagine if you decided to use just one double page like this for your teaching. Not only are you getting the children to do the digraphs that they know, it's making sense. They're suddenly thinking, yes, it's in that word, or the alternatives are in that word. But more than anything, as we move, along with children's reading, what else are they doing? They're doing tricky words, they're doing punctuation, they're doing pronunciation, they're doing singular and plurals. They may be doing regular spellings and irregular spellings. So every bit of resource you have can be used in many different ways. And you can surprise the children by giving something different to consolidate what they've done in the class. It doesn't have to be a reader every day. But could you imagine using a couple of pages out of something like this and asking them to do something completely different to what is expected? Keeps children engaged, be it post-its, be it headbands, be it anything. But what we are doing is bringing them back to the point of, why am I learning this? What am I gaining? And that's what often children ask themselves, what's the point? And you know that from being in the classroom where you have that child who's looking at you saying, I don't know, I don't know. So I hope, as we're coming to the end of this session, I hope that you have had some great insights in what can be done, but also you've picked up a few things from my experience of teaching, which is that we often have to really think of our classes. They're not the same. Every year you can have a different class. Every year it could be completely different with the speed they learn. And this is the intimate relationship we have with your children. But also, those children who can accelerate, and you're helping those, but more than anything, the children who may need to slow down. You don't want it to be too slow that it becomes very hard for them to pick up that pace and use it, but you also want to be mindful of English as a second language, comprehension and understanding. But more than anything, your planning. And remember, no stress for teachers. This is a program that should not create stress for you. So thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again at the end of October. And lovely to hear from all these people that I know. And yeah. And Sinead, any questions? I think we're out of time, but please pop into our shop and have a look. And yeah, we'll see you next time. So bye everybody for now, and I hope you enjoyed it. Big thumbs up from us. It was great to have you here with us.